was Indio today.
It's cold.
Yeah. It's been cold.
The mornings are chilly and it's nice.
Yeah.
This conference will now be recorded.
We went down to Palm Desert a week ago. And it was nippy in the morning.
Yeah. Yep. My kids are complaining it's too cold.
Yeah, they're desert people.
They are.
It's good. Good they like to eat. No. Yeah, we go to the Costco down there occasionally.
Yeah, I go there pretty often.
It was busy. I kind of forgot it was Thanksgiving week.
Right. How was your Thanksgiving?
Well, it was quiet. It was going to be quiet, and then it became quiet. We had one guest, a friend who have spent time with, so he was concerned that he was exposed and quarantined. Yeah, it's very quiet. 2-person Thanksgiving. We had planned a large meal. So we've got small quickly.
Yeah.
You live in India?
No, I live in Cathedral City. Just
okay.
A little bit east. I'm still in the valley.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun. All right, well, we'll get going. Looks like Heidi's logging in. Everybody but Anne
all right.
Showing up.
Good morning, Miguel. Manuel, sorry.
Good morning. It's fine. Everybody does it.
I see Eric is joined, but not on camera. We'll get started and how we do. Yeah, let me do a roll call. We'll go reverse alphabetical order. So, Sarah Toyota.
Here.
Schneider, not seeing him. Heidi Sanborn.
Here.
Eric Patashna.
Here.
Manuel Medrano.
I'm here.
And I saw Ann Schneider flash up here. So
I'm here.
Okay, and I hear her. Okay, good. I think today, hopefully we can wrap up our first set of recommendations. There's 5 different recommendations. They're all on the form that was established to bring them forward to the commission and roll into the report. We have no presentations scheduled today, so we can work our way through the recommendations, talk about the data requests that we did receive, and hopefully have some time to plan our next round of meetings and recommendations. But, so why don't we...
See that green cloth over there, Mom? Oh.
Yeah, why don't we, Kate, why don't you move down? There we go. So are there any new public comments received?
Yes, sorry, and I'm messing this up. There's one public comment I'm publishing now from Gail Bryce from XT Green. Subject, you know what? It's about carpet. Would you like me to hold until the recommendation section, or that's the next thing? So
yeah, why don't we? Since that's a specific recommendation.
Okay, perfect. So no other questions at this. I'm sorry, no other comments at this time.
Okay, and there was a pretty lengthy comment submitted to the commission from LA County's solid waste task force I haven't been able to unpack that comment yet, and I'm not sure if Heidi, are you you're muted? So maybe at the, yeah. Heidi, I was asking about the LA County Task Force comment. Is that going to be kind of distributed to the different committees, or do we need to each of us unpack the comment ourselves?
Are you, by unpack, you meaning assigned to a committee?
Yeah, try to figure out which parts are directed to us.
Yes, I think most of those, a lot of them were organics. Market development, I think, was consolidate facility permitting processes based on performance, not preference. I think that is something that we would tackle since we've talked about GoBiz. Right?
Yeah.
And then also, let's see, there was EPR comments that were referred to Ted and I. And then market development, another one I thought, increasing the RMDZ fund and the monies that are available per loan to meet the scalability needs of new projects. That fits into our market development committee.
Right.
And then those were the ones that I thought were directly related to market development.
Okay. Yeah, I recall those two. I just didn't know if there were.
There's one other that's kind of split between organics, so maybe you and Eric can talk about this, but ensuring proper controls to prevent the export of organic material from quarantine zones. To me, that seems more organics related. Eric, have you been able to look at that letter from LA County and their recommendations? The organics?
Yeah, I have, and we'll take it up at our meeting next week.
Okay, great. And there's another one that straddles several committees, 3 committees actually. Fund the needed recycling infrastructure and services, including prioritizing GGRF funds for the most cost-effective GHG's emission strategy of recycling. I think that's more a recycling and organics issue than it is a market development issue myself, but.
Yeah, we have a bulleted GGRF item, so we can see if it fits when we get to that, but it's not up for today's discussion. So a couple of those items are actually pertinent to what we're going to be talking about. Why don't we, Kate, why don't you pull up the consolidated permit?
Within the market development. Sure. Yeah. Also, just to note that I'm sorry, LA letter is in the Google Drive. I mean, I was just looking under public comment letters for those watching. Right. And let me pull up your consolidated permit.
I've tried to post all those letters in the Google Drive under a folder called public comments. So if anybody can't find a letter, look there. If you know there's a letter that's come in that isn't there, let me know, or just upload it yourself. And I'm happy to upload it if you can't figure it out. So everybody can see all the comments.
So this recommendation has been floating around with us for a while. I think it was one of the first ones that we worked on. It was the subject of the BIN Summit, and so there was a lot of discussion. Heidi Sanborn, Alex Oseguera, and I were part of that. We had meetings with Cal EPA, Cal Recycle, with GoBiz. And I think the one question that has come up is, does this process work? Has anybody tried it? And we have yet to find a project in 27 years that anybody can recall that worked its way into the process, all the way through the process. So,
John, can I clarify what you just said? Because you said that 3 of us were talking with GoBiz. I want to make sure everybody knows that was not part of the commission work. That was part of the discussion we were having about the Build Infrastructure Now Summit that was separate from this commission work. So I just don't want people to think we were doing 3 people meetings that were not supposed to.
It was, exactly. It was the preparation for the BIN Summit, and so which was a free and open public webinar. So so this was discussed during the BIN Summit. There were constantly over 100 people. I haven't seen the final count, but I think it was close to 110 plus people who attended different parts of the summit. Most people were there for the whole time. So basically, the Permit Streamlining Act allows Cali, PA to bring together all the state agencies issuing environmental permits, including regional water boards and air pollution control districts. This recommendation is to include local government as part of that process. And there were comments, particularly from people working on organics projects during the BIN Summit, that one of the difficulties in bringing organics projects forward is you go into a planning department with a compost facility. It's the first time that planning department has seen a compost facility, and it's a bit a luck of the draw as to what planner gets assigned to it, and then they start with basically a zero knowledge base. So the idea here is to modify the implementation of the Permit Streamlining Act, not modify the act, but just bring local government people into the room with the state agencies all at one time at the table, sharing information about the project and working then through the permitting process. Kate, if you want to scroll down, I expanded the narrative here quite a bit from the first time I went to the commission, because people wanted to know more about the Permit Streamlining Act. It does have not just a single point of contact, but a time frame in which the state agencies have to respond. They have to lay out their permit conditions and then move forward once the applicant begins to submit information. So yeah, it's that paragraph that starts with Secretary of Cali, PA, reviews the information, designates a lead permit agency. Within 5 days, notify to schedule a meeting within 15 days. And then each agency and the applicant is given the information needed. The Consolidated Permit Agency provides information about what is needed to complete the permits, and a plan is created with timelines. Okay, so this is real similar to what local governments do under Permit Streamlining, which is a different statute. But and then each agency has 30 days once the applicant submits information to determine if the application is complete, and you move forward from there, requesting additional information, another 30 days, and that Consolidated Permit Agency, the lead agency, then works to make sure that the process, participating agencies perform the work within those timeframes. And once everybody is completed, then there's 30 days for the last agency to issue its permit. So it's a pretty explicit process. It's on the books. We're not suggesting revising the process. We are suggesting adding local agencies to the process with the goal to increase market demand by assuring ongoing materials supplies and feedstock, but also moderating investment risks by laying out a more explicit process. So Cali, PA and Cal Recycle would work together. There's no need for this to be a legislative priority since it's already on the books. It would require some redirection of existing staff. Clearly, if no one's using the process, then there's no staff people actively involved in it. So we can roll down a bit more. Yeah. So So we're looking at overcoming immediate removal of barriers and overcoming administrative obstacles. List the various agencies involved, including GoBiz. That we hope that GoBiz, since they have permitting expertise, they're really doing a lot of this, but they don't necessarily have the authority to bring together the local air districts and water boards. At least we haven't determined that. Then we get into the specific recommendations, beginning with one is to set a threshold for significant climate impact priority, to try to bring forward some projects that have significant impacts due to the volume of material that's handled and their associated emission reduction factors. So, higher an emission reduction factor like methane reduction, the lower the volume of material might be. Lower emission factors like paper pulping would have higher volume. And so you get to be significant. We don't necessarily determine that threshold, but it's to not bring forward too many projects at once, and then use the local development agreements as a way to bring in the local requirements. Development agreements allow local governments to set site-specific modifications to their zoning or general plan requirements. So, development agreement, for example, the issue about whether the zoning allows a compost facility to be overcome with a development agreement, where that specific site might be appropriate for compost, even though the zoning standards don't necessarily explicitly allow compost. But you could use a development agreement in lieu of a conditional use permit or a modification to the zoning. Then there's project completion date. Becomes unchanged. There's no change in discretionary authority. No agency is forced to issue a permit, but the agency issues a permit when the project applicant complies with the agency's conditions. And then using pilot projects, bring forward couple projects and use the process and try to work through this, see if it's a good process. Designate a lead Cal EPA contact, and clarify that the GoBiz might reach out to Cal EPA to initiate the process. And GoBiz is doing permitting assistance now. This process has some advantages. And then also authorize Cal Recycle to initiate the process with Cal EPA for the same reason. They're aware of our projects. So it's related to market development and GoBiz proposals. That's the extent of our recommendation. If we've had it in front of us, brought it to the commission, some suggestions, went back and added that more detail about what the process entails as far as timelines and information. And then again, it was heard. We talked about it extensively at the Bend Summit with well over 100 people involved. So that's some public exposure. We can. If you have any comments now, we can do it. We don't need to move things individually. We can move.
I don't see the chat, John.
Is that enabled? Yeah.
Sorry,
Chat's not enabled. Okay.
doing it now. Apologies.
I'm not saying any. Do you want to comment, Heidi?
Yeah, I was thinking, I support this in concept. I think I still want to see a final review by the folks at GoBiz. And I'd like to ask the Cal Recycle staff for their feedback on this. But I think this in concept is ready to move to the full commission. But again, John had planned to, I think, share this with the GoBiz staff that we had talked to. John and I alone had talked with them about a week or two ago. And I just want to make sure they are okay. And this works for them before we give it a final thumbs up and put it in the report. But we can certainly move this to the next level while we're waiting for their feedback, and also ask Cal Recycle to give us some feedback. So that would be my proposal.
Yeah, and we have a separate Go Biz proposal that we've seen, but we'll bring that one up next and share both of these with Go Biz. So, Eric, you.
Yeah, could you go down to the development agreement section?
Yeah.
Tell me when to stop.
I think you're right there. What number was it? Number 2, yeah. So, John, having worked on these before, the CUP process is not really what slows it down. The CUP process typically for when we're trying to site a compost facility in an area that wasn't zoned for it, it's really slowed down by the CEQA process. The CUP process just works in parallel with it. I've never actually had to wait for the CUP process to finish up before we can get to an approval. It's always been CEQA. So I'm just trying to figure out what is there a specific type of project that's not going to require any CEQA that this would solve for?
Go up, Kate, go up to the top. There's a description of the development agreements up top. And I think this is just a recommendation to overcome some of what we heard during the BIN summit. There we go. The Permit Streamlining Act. That's local government permitting obligations. Local government development agreements are authorized, and they're contracts between the project proponents and public agencies governing land use. And they must be consistent with local planning policies and through the general plan. But it's a workaround, Eric, more around zoning issues. I think what we've heard during the BIN summit is that there are times when a site, the allowable uses on a site may not explicitly include something like a compost facility. And so even a conditional use permit, in some planners' views, a conditional use permit wouldn't apply to a site where the permitted use was not explicitly allowed in the zoning ordinance. So a conditional use permit is usually used to set the conditions of a project that's permitted within the zoning standards. So a development agreement is a workaround when you hit a wall at a planning agency because composting isn't explicitly allowed within any of its zoning.
I've always used those together, not one response. I've actually put development agreements on top of CUPs with CEQA to get these things done.
Yeah, okay. and that could be a workaround on a specific limitation in the
All right.
in the zoning ordinance. But the CEQA issue, we didn't take up CEQA. Any volunteers?
No.
It's a tougher one. We've got a small bullet that we can go back to later on CEQA, and it's really just to maybe try to improve the CEQA guidelines to make it more explicit that a project like a compost facility has a greenhouse gas reduction benefit. And I've heard stories about EIRs coming back in that only look at the greenhouse gas impacts of a project without considering the reduction. So, something like that could be a beneficial addition to the guidelines on CEQA. And we've got a bullet to come back to and talk about that one. So we've got a couple of, and
I actually hate to bring this up. However, it might be a tool. With local government, the state of California has passed a number of housing laws that have really reduced local government's ability to slow down the approval of housing. One of them is actually the auxiliary dwelling unit law, and the other one is on other housing. And what it does is it takes away the number of times CEQA can be used to slow down a process, or it takes away the number of public meetings a city can hold on a development. So for example, now a large apartment complex can only have five public meetings. That includes planning department and city council. The downside of this is it takes away our ability to negotiate for community developments, even and possibly including fire and police services. So there's a really bad downside to this. However, the legislation has approved and the governor has signed, whichever governor has signed these bills to help line the process. I don't know if there's a parallel for this for composting, but clearly housing has reached the point that it's a crisis. So the state has moved on this. If composting has achieved the same area, which I believe it has, then maybe something similar can be done with that. It does modify some of the developer agreement language to a, golly, John, you can, if you've worked in this, it's a PD. It's a slightly different developer agreement. I'd have to go do some research. It's a plan development, but there's just another area, and I don't come from planning. This might be something for us to look at. It doesn't modify CEQA, but it limits the number of meetings that can help drag out a process at the local government level. And by that, I mean city, county.
Yeah, I think, and you know, we've kind of taken position on this committee that we should look at broader issues, where the organics committee is going to be talking about market development issues specific to organics. So one of the CEQA related issues there is this essential public service designation. Landfills are essential public services, and so there's some forgiveness on air district permitting issues, for example, under new source review. But compost facilities are not essential public services. So I guess if it were a compost facility specific, I'd rather defer to the organics committee and let them see what they're talking. I think I know what you're mentioning, Ann, and I know that was those were huge battles to make any change to CEQA.
Huge,
I'm not sure yet that that's something we want to take.
You know what? And whichever hat I'm wearing on, it's a little bit scary, but it shouldn't take years and years of public process to get these things cited. And composting is an essential service. So we really need to start standing up for that.
Yeah, and I think let's hear from the market development committee or the organics committee on those issues, and then let's take a look at it when we bring up the CEQA recommendations. Okay. And Heidi, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess I hadn't heard before, so it was good to hear from Commissioner Potashner that the problem hasn't been the other permits, it's been CEQA and the delays, because I had not heard that from others that were saying they were seeing 12-year, 13-year permitting. So if that's the situation, I think we have to address it. But again, that's a huge can of worms. And I wonder if the role of this commission and we were supposed to figure out how to make curbside recycling work better and get our recycling rates up. This clearly is getting in the way of getting our recycling rates up. And I wonder if we just make the statement that CEQA delays are causing part of the problem here, and that we need the legislature to address it, but not necessarily make recommendations and get into that. I mean, we're volunteer commissioners already working really hard, and we don't have the staff or the resources, I think, to get into this and become experts in CEQA. So I'd be happy to hear from Commissioner Potashner if he's got any thoughts on that.
Sure, and just let me clarify, Heidi. Typically the folks that are working on the CUP are also the folks that are managing the CEQA process in the jurisdictions we're working on, and you can't completely disconnect them. You're dealing with how many truck trips are going to be at a site versus, there may be some underlying conditions on a local zoning when it comes to vehicle traffic. So I don't want to say they're like one is the issue and one's not the issue, but typically the process of getting through the technical studies, specifically around air, is always a big issue. That that takes a little while to unwind, and is usually I would say more of a issue for local planning staff to get their minds around, because they just typically don't deal with compost facilities. So I do think what we've talked about in the past is having some sort of local assistance from Cal Recycle on CEQA would be helpful. When it comes to CEQA, I have not seen too much on the back end in terms of appeal processes. So, there's always for sustainable developments or other types of projects like wind and solar and affordable housing, they've had a truncated appeals process. We could look at doing something similar to that. I don't know if that would make too much of an impact, because I haven't seen too many lawsuits actually slowing down compost facilities. At the end of the day, it's for CEQA, what's I would say is the biggest issue is going to still be getting solid emission factors, understanding issues around naphthalene, understanding what the health risk assessment issues are. The local governments just don't have that capability, and they end up having to pull data from different studies all around the state. And not all of those studies are applicable to the feedstock that are coming into a specific compost facility. And, getting better data on that on a regional basis, I think would help streamline the process. It's not so much about technically how do you tweak CEQA, it's how do you feed CEQA better data on a regionalized level, I think would move things faster. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I've heard that also, and I wonder, Eric, about a programmatic EIR approach that was at least done for anaerobic digestion. Is that maybe something that we could bring out where Cal Recycle could take a look at different composting methods and try to come up with some of those factors?
I think it's worth looking into for sure.
Okay. So again, without wanting to step on your committee's work, is that something that you think is going to come forward, or should we can make reference in here?
I think you make reference. We're not, because it's such a thorny issue. We're not going to have something big for the January. I think that this is more for the July report in terms of how do you deal with CEQA and local zoning.
So
Just reference it, John.
Yeah. Yeah. So why don't we, Kay, why don't you put a placeholder? I don't know where.
I can download this. I can't put up. I don't have access to this. But
you don't have. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know who gives you access, but
no, I don't. You don't give me access.
Okay, I'll do it on mine. Yeah, sorry, I'll do it on mine. Yeah, I found another.
I can download would you like me to download a Word copy of this and make a mark and then send it to you? If that works, that I can do that.
Sure, that would help me. Yeah, just a placeholder, and then I'll try to summarize some of the discussion we've had, but not without trying to resolve it. And you had you wanted to speak.
It's kind of a dumb question, because I haven't been involved in a composting siting process. How good are the staff from the air quality boards in dealing with? Are they helpful? Are they prompt? I've had my own experience trying to get them to pay attention to microparticulates from SFO, where I find that they don't even consider it something they monitor. So SFO gets a pass for any pollution they create. So how are they to deal with, and is there something we can do to encourage cooperation? I'm
looking to Mr. Potash.
Oh,
me too.
Sure. I mean, I think like all things, it sometimes matters which staff member individual you get on a project versus the department. That said, I think the issue I just talked about around lack of strong data on a sort of regionalized basis when it comes to the waste stream has been the hang up with the air districts as well, especially when it comes to health risk assessments. And, they've got it's not a competing mission, but they have to look at a broader set of circumstances, not just whether or not we're pulling organics out of the landfill. So I think sometimes they run into some level of conflict. I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but I do appreciate the fact that they have a complicated task ahead of them when it comes to compost facilities. But that doesn't really answer your question. For the Bay Area District, and they've been diligent to work with.
That's good to hear. And when I finally got through to my fifth or sixth person, they were like, "Oh, well, and they do this." Everybody pointed in a different direction. They're very friendly, but I wonder if there's legislation we can ask for that. I honestly, this is out of my area, but I think their mission is old. Their mission in the Bay Area, from my perspective, is they monitor hydrocarbons from processing facilities and old industrial, and they've let the airports get away with everything. And they're not doing anything. And to me, that means that their mission needs to be updated. I know we don't have the power to update their mission. I can go to the two elected officials who serve on the Air Quality Board. But even back 20 years ago, I kind of felt if their staff came to our events, they would learn the importance of composting. Maybe it's just I don't know, a panel that solid waste people and air people sit on together, anything that can kind of help bridge the two missions. And I'll keep thinking on this, but
the essential consideration then would be that the air districts work under the Clean Air Act, and so they're in each air district has its own set of criteria pollutants. So there's no single, with the water boards now, there's a statewide general order that applies. You start with that. It's different at the air districts because each district is non-attainment for different criteria pollutants. So the Mojave Desert Air Quality Management District is non-attainment for PM10, large particulate matter. Nothing else falls within their Clean Air Act work. So putting the compost facility through the air quality district in my area is about as simple as it gets. It takes about 5 minutes to get the determination. So it's really different. Each district has its own set, right, Eric?
Yeah, the only thing I'd also mention, and I'm not too versed in this yet, but the CARB is looking at new regulations around toxics that would require greater source testing at compost facilities for a host of other emissions. So I think it's less on it could end up tying to the permitting side in the future as those source emission tests are required. That will get tied to future air permits. It's theoretical right now because it's still in the regulatory process. So it could get harder, not easier on some of this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So Kate, I think why don't you add at the last page under 8, let's just put a placeholder for CEQA, and it would be to acknowledge CEQA impacts on permitting, encourage a focus on resolving those impacts, consider statewide EIR for significant projects. And then I think we just wait and see what comes forward from organics. They've got some very specific reports and other items that they're looking at. Essential public service. Yeah, statewide EIR for significant projects and essential public service designation.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Okay, let's move on.
We
bring
did.
Pull up GoBiz. Yeah, pull up the GoBiz.
Okay. We actually, we skipped the meeting notes, finalizing the meeting notes.
Sorry. Yeah.
No worry. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, so our practice on meeting notes would be if anybody has modifications to the notes, you can submit those now or by the end of the meeting, and if not, we'll just accept the notes as provided. I do review them and try to get it to correspond with my memory. We do these very, very quickly right after the meeting, within a day or two, so they're pretty fresh. So I'm not hearing any updates to those notes, but we'll hold it open until the end of the meeting.
Okay.
So why don't you bring up the carpet? I'm sorry, not carpet, GoBiz.
GoBiz.
Something that, yeah. And so the GoBiz, as Heidi mentioned, is related to the consolidated permitting, and we did, the two of us as a subcommittee met with the GoBiz staff and talked about the two, provided them with copies of the consolidated permitting language, and we'll circle back on that issue. So GoBiz is the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. It was created during the Jerry Brown era, so it postdates that consolidated permit process, and permit streamlining is one of GoBiz's functions, along with clearing of regulatory hurdles, site selection, international trade, and so they're really the focus in the state government for business and economic development. So once you roll down, okay. So no need for legislative change. What our recommendation is really to focus the GoBiz assistance directly on our projects. CalRecycle staff works with GoBiz, but it doesn't always include local zone administrators, for example, on R&DZ projects. We might learn about what happened with GoBiz after the fact. We might not. So why don't you go down? And yeah, so it's really just to enhance their GoBiz capacity. One would be to have a dedicated work group for recycling manufacturing and organics management projects. So, back to our discussion that we just held on the consolidated permit, if there were people at GoBiz who are knowledgeable through their experience with our projects, we'd like to be able to call on those people and not make a cold call and end up with someone who doesn't know what a compost facility is about or the difference on recycling-based manufacturing. And then in line with the consolidated permitting, have a designated GoBiz liaison. So 1 and 2 could be the same person. We use work group just because GoBiz has staff over broader areas, but I think what we're really looking for is someone at GoBiz that people in our industry could reach out to. CalGold is GoBiz's intake form for businesses. So if you start on the GoBiz website, you go to CalGold and you put in the type of business that you're looking for help with, and it shows you where to go. So tying 1 and 2 together and recognizing that CalGold doesn't include, for example, composting projects. If you want to build a compost project in California, you go to GoBiz, you go to CalGold, you put in composting, nothing comes up. Okay? So get that recognition along with reuse and repair businesses, and then point them to the assistance that is available. So CalGold's an existing function of GoBiz. Coordinating business financing options with CalRecycle and local government market development efforts. That's, I think, a topic that Mr. Medrano and I, we hear about referrals to GoBiz from RMDZ projects, but we don't always know what happens, and we may not learn about those referrals until after the fact, if we learn at all. So, and again, we don't necessarily have the access to be able to dial in the knowledge that the CalRecycle's been able to pull together. And then lastly, sharing job development and training assistance, including the focus on environmental justice communities with CalRecycle and local market development identified businesses. So that assistance is out there. The EJ focus, I think, is something that we've learned to try to pull job development and training out of environmental justice communities. It's a part of the grant writing effort for the GGRF grants that specifically called forward that focus. So again, it's giving us a point of contact, a focus around this time job development and training system along the same lines as the business financing options. So it's pretty straightforward. I don't think it's earth changing, but it just is in a couple of items bringing that information in a way that it's more accessible, and then on the other items bringing a point of contact that we could look to who's familiar with our. Heidi, did you and I work this one over? Do you have any comments? So I think this one, again, I'll circle back, and Heidi and I will try to circle back to GoBiz and let them look at this specifically.
Basically, we're asking for a vote, right, John, for the committee to pass it along just like the other one so that we can take it up on Wednesday?
Yeah, either by vote or by consensus. I think, I guess I would say on any of these, if there's anybody has concerns, then let's call for a vote. But in the absence of a vote, we can use the consensus process that the commission established. So, and
I was working with, I can say this, with Ted on the source reduction sections over the weekend and hit the wall of, well, if it hasn't been discussed at the committee or commission level, can the language be included as it's getting written up? So that's my frame here. I'm looking at GoBiz, and it may not be GoBiz, and I don't know, looking at the reuse world as an example, a lot of the loss of reuse businesses is because they're a smaller margin business. They can't compete with higher margin businesses for space. You look at Silicon Valley, you will never have a thrift store be able to compete with Google as a really simple model. So land banking, I'm looking at this and I'm wondering if, I don't think it's a GoBiz function. I think it is a function at the county level where counties are required to have landfill capacity for 15 years for its population. Is there some place in our documents, John, that talks about the importance and what are the essential significant projects? And are we looking long-term out there for what are considered essential businesses? If we lose, like my area is losing, almost every Goodwill, Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul, the big variety, the Humane Society, all of those reuse stores are going away because they can't afford the land. What can we do? And it may not fit here. I'm just thinking how Ted said, and we can't put that in the report because it hasn't gone to the commission yet. And so if this is our only chance to get it in front of the commission so that we can later on expand on it. In my world, I would think that each county says, okay, we need X number of all of these businesses, and we need to look at procuring land. And maybe it might be the public works lots that cities still have, that the county still has. I keep thinking of this for AB or 2020 collection sites. If we can't get it at a supermarket, can we put it in one of our corp yards? and our courtyards far enough away from residents that there won't be a lot of complainers. But we need to start thinking about the land for these areas, or rent protection, or something that I mentioned on one of our frequent calls, which is something like a Williamson Act for what are essential businesses.
So when we get to the cow recycle recommendations, I think there's a door that might open.
Okay, thank you. Just, sorry, I've been so much out of it the last 3 months to try to figure out the right place for things. But, we talked land banking 20 years ago, but I'm not sure anybody's really ever done a whole lot of work for it.
And my impression in this economy is there's going to be a lot of commercial space available.
So this is that opportunity. Every recession then therefore becomes an opportunity.
But we don't have redevelopment agencies to take advantage of it like we used to.
But our MRFs are recognized as critical, and our landfills are recognized as critical. These other businesses have to be recognized as critical.
Thank you. I feel strongly, that we do need these businesses and we need to protect them. But I guess the question I have is this a local land use issue? Or is this a statewide issue? And we're tasked with a statewide, addressing recycling, reuse, et cetera. If there is some recommendation that the state needs to take up, then we have 3 meetings left. So we have this Wednesday, 2 Wednesdays after, and then the following, the immediate Friday, to make sure we had time if something came up. So if there was something you wanted to put into a policy, we could draft it now and put it in front of the commission Wednesday. But I'm not sure what the state policy would be.
And I suggested looking at the cow recycle one. So just to keep it in mind, Eric, you want to
not that it's baked, but one thing that Anne's talking about is land. State does have surplus land. The state's been tasked to look at housing for surplus land. If housing is not appropriate, maybe there should be some mechanism to have the state look at securing that land for reuse businesses.
Or both.
Or both. If you can do both.
Yeah. I have communities I work in, and basically most of the businesses there are reuse focused, and so I think the statewide issue is really areas with high property values is probably the issue. In other areas, those businesses follow the population. So I like that idea that Eric just suggested.
I wouldn't say just reuse. I think maybe it's our redemption centers too. They would fall in the same category.
Oh, and food distribution, and the whole range of.
That's a simple recommendation. Sorry. Yeah. So
let's bring up, if we're okay moving on from GoBiz, why don't we bring up the cow recycle, and I'll point to the spot where I think we might be able to insert something today. This is one that Mr. Medrano and I have been working on extensively. We presented these recommendations to the semi-annual meeting of RMDZ administrators and cow recycle staff that had, 128 people, I think, something like that. Cow recycle staff and local government RMDZ people. So you've got a pretty good airing. The idea here is that the cow recycle does a lot around market development. Almost all the different branches or divisions in cow recycle have market development focus, but no one has the market development focus. So if everyone is doing market development, then no one is focused on market development. It becomes an aspect of everything else they're doing. And so the idea here is to create a market development section staffed with business development, fiscal, and economic analysis expertise to identify and recruit needed industries. And it's that different focus Cowrie Cycle local assistance and market development is largely staffed by environmental scientists. They're very knowledgeable, very good at what they do, but they don't necessarily understand the business development aspects of projects. And so, right in that second paragraph is to create a framework, identify gaps in statewide recycling, organics, reuse, and repair infrastructure, and prepare strategy with stakeholders to fill the gaps. So there's a couple of specific suggested focuses later on, but that I think is the door that you just talked about, how we bring reuse and repair infrastructure into that discussion. But it's to do that assessment, to bring together all of the knowledge that is there at the Cowrie Cycle and in the stakeholder community. Added colleges and universities here based on some feedback that we received from the commission at its last meeting, and then added a couple of bullets that were on the GoBiz. If you want to scroll up slightly, Kate, to that, yeah, up. The other up. There you go. Yeah. So and then added go down. Just you want to get that there. There we go. So the framework should consider developing investment opportunities in reuse, repair, recycling, manufacturing, and organic waste management projects by a national and international invitation events. That was language that had been knocking around on the GoBiz recommendation, and we brought it over here. But I think this is the place, if we want to have a specific recommendation for reuse business siting, this would be the place to put it in there. These are kind of, we're nudging the framework by saying, here's some ways to develop that framework. You could say develop investment and siting opportunities in reuse, repair, recycling, manufacturing, and organics. And
could we recommend?
Sorry, go ahead, Ann. I will switch to a Word version so I can log any updates.
Thank you.
I haven't read the Williamson Act in at least 20 years, but it's if you dedicate land, you keep it at a lower tax basis. So it's also getting into taxing areas, property taxing areas.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Williamson Act. I also, I was on a board of a nonprofit land conservation group on the board of a private business that they had to acquire to buy some conservation land. And the business had some territory under the Williamson Act that got pulled out. But the key thing was that the nonprofit land, the land they were able to transfer immediately to conservation land, was tax exempt because it was nonprofit. You'd also have a tax exempt if it were public land. So, if you had redevelopment agencies and a redevelopment agency acquired land, there'd be no property tax aspect on that land. But it's the same for a nonprofit. So you might be able to get, the Williamson Act basically is for for-profit agricultural businesses that require the land stay in agricultural use for a period of time. And if it's pulled out, then you have to make good on the forgiven property tax. So there's a penalty to pull it out.
So do you think that there's a way to apply it here?
I mean, yeah, we could come up with, I guess, do we need to be that specific? Do we want to say there's an issue that needs to get addressed, or do we want to propose solutions to it? You could take, we do conservation easements, right? We put private land under a perpetual conservation easement, and then that land has a reduced property tax. So there could be easement on the land for essential reuse and repair businesses.
I mean, I like that. The other idea that I'm thinking of, we recently updated our county integrated waste management plan, and there was no discussion at all of essential businesses. So going completely out of taxing, going into what Heidi said, statewide rule that affects everybody at the local level. And maybe it's because 2/3 of my county is all under one company. They don't really tend to think much more beyond recology with the rest of the infrastructure on it. It was completely ignored in terms of anything. So I don't know if the planning documents have to have a new portion updated every 5 years, and the planning documents, I think we hadn't updated in 20 years, so it had been way behind as a second area.
So
I like the idea of at least looking at it. And I like the idea that Eric came up with, which if there are public lands or quasi-public lands, Caltrain was required for their excess land to look at it for housing. I think that was their board of directors decision. But if it's not housing, because sometimes this is right next to railroad tracks, not exactly what I would call prime housing, but it could be a good recycling-based location because it's already noisy.
Manuel?
So I don't know if we're prepared today to bring in this language. It's quite impactful. So perhaps we could just support it in concept and then develop it in the July recommendation. So it could be as easy as just inserting what we're talking about, inserting a sentence here that we support it. We support some kind of, I can't even think of the language now, but we could come up with it, and we'll further develop it as a recommendation on the final one.
I think that would be great, John. So just inserting a language, looking at tax and public land use for essential recycling, reuse, composting businesses, repair. I think that would fit everything. The other one, the other one that I talked to Ted about that has been difficult to fit in is bulky good collection systems, some of which favor.
Can we finish this language before we move on to another one, just to make sure we're all in agreement? I just want to make sure we finish this. So if we support tax and public land use.
Tax abatement, I think is what you want.
Maybe we say we support the concept of the state incentivizing essential recycling or essential reuse, recycling, composting businesses, repair businesses through tax abatement, land use, excess land, donation, etc. And the commission, we hope to have a more thought through proposal by July or something like that. I just want to make sure we capture this correctly, because this is our last shot to kind of get it in there for Wednesday.
Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah, and you know, this language again is what we're asking Cal Recycle to consider in a kind of market development framework. But at least it gives, you know, it puts it in writing. We could bring it out. We could pull this out as a separate item for the future.
The only other thing, I can't remember if I talked to Ted about it or was dreaming about it last night, is also looking at public-private partnerships in facility siting. And public-private partnership could be looking at a Facebook campus that has a parking lot a good half a mile away from the campus, but they're not using. Could that become an AB 2020 collection zone? That's what I meant by thinking of other areas where we have large parking lots in a lot of big tech industrial or not industrial land.
I think that one might better when the recycling committee brings forward
The 2020 stuff.
Yeah, and I'd be reluctant to take that one on myself.
Sometimes you can be surprised. Some of our tech industries become good partners, of course, until their business model adapts. It'll be good for X number of years and then life will change.
Yeah, that recommendation would open up another can of worms. I'm looking at this one to make sure we captured it. So I'll kind of mesh it into the language, so because I think
Very much
the language above is broader. You know what the framework should consider, and we'll put it in that framework language. But I'll clean it up a little bit before.
Excellent. Thank you.
Before Wednesday. Okay, and so there's a couple of priorities called out. Mr. Potashner and I identified paper pulping as a priority opportunity at, I think, our very first discussion, so it's in here. 8 million tons. This just blew me away when we did the bin summit. We had a couple of presentations from brand new greenfield paper pulping projects, one in Utah, one in Virginia. And the Utah project, for example, uses 325,000 tons a year of paper pulping. We have 8 million tons. It means that we could have 24 Utah-sized projects across California just to handle it.
Thanks. I guess I'm concerned if the recommendations are not focused and clear enough. Everybody knows we need markets for paper. I guess the question is, what exactly are we asking the state to do, and who in the state to do it? Because this feels like it's, hey, we need paper, somebody should do something. But I mean, CalRecycle has RMDZs, they have market development section. What exactly are we asking them to do? Put paper above everything else?
I think you need to look at it in the context of the preceding paragraph, where, Kate, if you roll up, no, that's the new one that you need to slot in. So it's go up. What I think what the recommendation specifically is, Heidi, is the CalRecycle. There we go. Create a framework. It's that second paragraph. Create a framework to identify gaps in infrastructure and prepare strategies to fill the gaps. And give the paper pulping is an example of a gap, an opportunity. And maybe it's not just gaps, but opportunities, but it's in that context.
So are we clear that CalRecycle with the market development section has never identified the gaps and tried to fill them? Or have they done that and it hasn't worked to our satisfaction? I guess I just want to be really, really clear on what it is we're asking someone to do, an entity. Who are we asking to do it, and what are we asking them to do to make recycling work better and create markets?
Yeah.
It just feels vague.
This says there should be a focus. There should be an explicit market development focus rather than this kind of diffused market development focus that exists now. And I guess the recommendation is do this framework. Bring that focus, put things in a framework, and determine priorities. I think exporting 8 million tons a year of paper is, if we're going to rely on our domestic market, there's a gap, big gap. Would it be more accurate to say we're asking CalRecycle to prioritize through their RMDZ program and the market development efforts, paper processing in California, that we're very, very short. This is a very
important need we've got to fill. And is it that simple? It just feels too vague to me.
I think it's intentionally vague to tell them to do a framework is pretty explicit, but we don't want to, right? We don't want to tell them what to put in the framework.
I just worry we're going to create another paperwork process. It's not going to result in anything getting done. I mean, by the time it takes them to do a framework, I don't know what that looks like or what that means. But to me, we already know the characterization studies. We know what materials need a market. Paper's one of them. What are they going to do, you know? So anyway, that's my comment.
Yeah, I think it's what are they going to do is maybe the question. And then, you know, you sit down with the project proponents, but we could be, if you go down, Kate, to the where the paper pulping there. So it does say the priorities include both traditional economic development approaches and industry-specific initiatives. So these were offered as examples, but we could make it far more explicit that these are priorities.
That would be my preference.
Okay. And we have, I know, Sarah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it helps me, I think, to make very clear that the way I see it is that we're recommending that in the very first paragraph that CalRecycle create a market development section that's staffed with people who know business and market development, and that should carry through the rest of it. So instead of just vaguely priorities for CalRecycle's market development focus, it should be this staff should be focused on, this new staff, this new section should be focused on these priority issues that are going on right now that haven't been resolved. So we can focus that and then decide whether we want to get more specific on what we want them to do. Does that make sense? So I would change the priorities for CalRecycle's market development focus to specifically priorities for the market development, the new market development section, or the following.
So just at the end of that sentence, Kate, just say include the following. There. So let's look at the other ones. We looked at paper pulping. Let's look at the other. So this second one, Manuel, this is something that we talked about. Mining databases identifying manufacturers who might be able to switch from virgin materials to recycled feedstock. We already have people making plastic products in California using virgin plastic flake, right, for molding. Let's, you know, who are those people? How do we link them through industrial databases and reach out to them to switch to use recycled plastic feedstock? If we're going to pulp paper, what are the uses for that paper pulp? So, you know, it's kind of a traditional economic development approach applied specifically to our businesses. And then we have reuse and repair here. We did receive the response to the data request. So if we want to put in, Kate, you want to bring up the data request response?
Sure.
That was really useful. Yeah, so CalRecycle received almost $17 million of requests for a $2 million grant, RFP. And here's what people are asking for. Single use, and then with recovery. So really interesting focus on replacement of single-use items, packaging, and food service, refillables and food serviceware. So does this suggest any specific, the language back on the recommendation was fairly general, but this suggests that right now there's some pretty clear priorities. I think the repair, people tell me they really didn't feel that the RFP fit them, so there's not necessarily anything about repair here. And
Chair Davis, just to be clear, I'm looking at the webpage for this grant. Those are the 4 eligible product types that you see. So those were each application had to fall into one of the following project types, yes.
Okay, so that's what they were asking for, and that's what they got.
Chair Davis, the repair group did reach out to Ted and me, and Ted has already drafted up. It'll go into Wednesday's report, I believe, the right to repair. And as an action for the statewide commission, it's mainly a right to repair. It's access to repair instructions from the manufacturers. And it has quite a few parts in it, but it would include, for example, if you manufacture a product with a value over $50 wholesale price at the point of retail, you would have to maintain parts for that product for 7 years past the last manufacturing date. It goes into more detail than that, but basically it covers point of sale to 7 years after the product is no longer sold on parts. And it would require making public repair instructions. It would include software that has to have the original manufacturer give permission to update, et cetera, kind of goes on and on like that. So there is a repair suggestion that will go forward on that.
Yeah, and I spoke to Peter Mui after the last labeling committee meeting and have some suggestions if that committee ever meets again. And because I was asked to talk to Peter about his suggestion on labeling for repair using QR codes. So, and I'm beginning to think that maybe the businesses that make that information available, make the parts and tools available, we should have a way to embrace them through a voluntary labeling standard, and then let the others who don't want to make that information available be identified by their absence through that kind of labeling. So that's another thought about repair.
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because again, reading all the work that Ted has done includes under food reuse, looking at all the labels that are used for food that may or may not be standardized. And I wrote back to him saying, yes, if the labeling committee does meet again, I don't think we've met in 2 months, we might want to be looking at the labels used for food.
Yeah.
In addition to that.
So why don't on this one, on the statewide source reduction, that last sentence, especially expansion and business startup potential, to replace to replace single-use food service.
How about we just make single-use period?
Yeah. I guess I was going back to the RFP language and trying to be explicit. But Heidi, you're muted, Heidi.
Yeah, I'm just worried these are very general. I don't know what anybody's going to take away from these if we don't make them very specific. I think a lot of people agree with all this. It's just a matter of what exactly are we asking them to do. Because these are
Heidi.
policy recommendations. No.
Heidi, is it an issue between what we can get done in January as to what we can get done in June or by June?
I think for me, it's just that, I just want to make sure that when we put this report out, no matter when it goes out, the January or the July, that the policy recommendations addressing what we were asked to address are there. And this feels very like we want these things to happen. But the question is, what we've been tasked to do is figure out how and give them advice on what to do about it. And I just want to make sure we're being very clear on the how and what we're telling them we think they should do about it in order to fix the problems. So I don't know. I'm just, I'm concerned. This is just too general.
Well, again, the recommendation is to bring a focus. That's missing now. I think that's a pretty explicit recommendation.
Let's bring a focus.
We could dive in.
What does bring a focus mean? I mean, I've been on the receiving end of lobbying.
To create a dedicated market development staff. It's the focus.
Well, so I've been an advisor to the chair. I remember what people would come in and ask us to do. And often the chair would say, what is it you want me to do? I'm not clear. Like if she couldn't figure out what it is people were asking her to do, she didn't really know what to do about it sometimes. And so I just want to make sure we're being really clear. We've already had a market development group there for decades. We've had a recycling market development zone program for decades. What is missing? What new are we asking them to do? I mean, a focus.
Okay, maybe you need to go up to the top.
There's more money for those loans, for those priority materials. I'm just trying to make sure that this doesn't get lost in the ether again.
Okay. It's to create a market development section staffed with business development, physical and economic development expertise to identify and recruit new needed industries.
By the unions and who can get hired, though. It's part of the problem at the state.
They did this before. There was a market development staff. It was abandoned 10 years ago. The number of loans went from 10 loans a year in the RTG program to 4. And the local assistance staff were to take over the market development focus as part of their local assistance work. Now they've got SB 1383 requirements looming on them, and there's no single focus for market development. It's spread across all the different divisions. This could be one person. I don't know. But it's somebody.
Maybe the world is centralized. Maybe it's centralized, not just focused. But maybe we say that the market development efforts are centralized into one unit within CalRecycle. Would that be clearer? Maybe.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I don't know the language of CalRecycle that well, but so a centralized market development unit instead of section.
That staff being spread out throughout the organization, that it's got a very singular focus. Okay, that helps me understand better, so hopefully that'll help other people.
Okay, so Kate, you want to do the next paragraph too, so section, get the section on there. And then I'll search and try to, I'll read through this recommendation again to make sure we're good. So back to I think we were talking about whether to say single-use food service packaging in containers or whether to say single-use items generally. In the interest of being explicit, I would use the language from the RFP. So it looks like somebody's got their hand raised.
Through the chair, I was going back to the one downside I see of concentrating all people with a market development perspective in one unit is how does that transfer out to the other units? Think back to the 1980s when, well, my mission had been to make sure before we put recycling, we put reuse before recycling. It's a change in mindset. So I agree with having a department that has everybody that you need, but every department at Cal Recycles has to look at whatever they are doing through the lens of a recycling market development perspective. They have to say, if this product is coming out or if this is the problem, is there a market? Is there not? If there isn't, then we've got to solve that problem. So I agree with what you've done, but it can also be problematic if people don't always have, for example, a reuse mindset or a market development mindset. It should be part of every department.
Kate, if you want to go back up to the
no, I don't want to belabor it. It's just, we fought, those of us in the reuse world fought really hard to get reuse, to get any attention in the first 10 years of AB 939. And then going back to your single serve, COVID put an end to a heck of a lot of single use bans. And now in my area anyway, the cities are starting to bring the single use bans back. And with a start date of 2022, so giving all of our restaurants, for example, an opportunity to exchange out the single-use or non-compostable items by 2022. I'm happy with replacing single-use. Whether it needs to be compostable, I think is problematic. But maybe what Cal Recycle staff has to do is help sector-specific businesses move away from single use to more durables. The other part that we're talking about here, which one restaurant actually has done that, and I'm going blank, it's the burrito place, the organic burrito place. You have to opt in to get disposables. So using opt-in or opt-out language, I'm trying to address Heidi's concern of something very specific. I think our specific recommendation is we're back to getting rid of single-use items. Period.
Yeah, I guess the question there was whether we use items or use specific reference to food service packaging. Once you put in items, and again, back up at the top, let's make a note, Kate, and I'll expand on it, that we don't want to lose the market development focus that exists now at Cal Recycle throughout the agency. So, yeah. Okay.
I would say, especially staff, all of us are going to have to be tougher. Oh, company A, you're introducing this package. It's not recyclable. Sorry, you can't come to California, is the direction that we're going in. And that's going to take some backbone.
Yeah, so the communication, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say Commissioner Medrano had a comment, and there's also one public comment, I believe.
Manuel, I'm sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, no problem. Just quickly, this is a benefit to the public to mention that the centralized focus, but this is a call of action that a lot of us in the RMDZ program have been bringing up to Cal Recycle. So more than likely, it was going to be referred to them, and we were going to be inquired about as to what this is. So what I'm saying is that they know what this centralized approach is, because we had it, like John mentioned, we had this in the past. We just hope that they bring that focus back, and with these additional suggestions we have here. But this, I guess it would be a good benefit to the public to see what we're talking about. That's all I have.
There's a public comment.
Sure. There's one public comment from Gail Bryce from XT Green. Subject is market development in Cow Recycle. I totally support the addition of a market development function at Cow Recycle, including the identification of gaps for investment. I've started to research cardboard, i.e. old cardboard containers, processing in California as an investment. I'm being told by MRF operators that they are paid significantly more to export their OCC than selling domestically, as it's much more expensive to recycle in California, which includes proper worker safety and environmental protection. Does your recommendations include support to California recyclers to help compete against exporters? And that is all the comments for this.
Yeah. There's no explicit mention of export. Heidi.
To make that a mention, I mean, we had that whole ban presentation about exports on plastics, and I mean, yeah. Isn't that part of the goal here?
Well, I don't know. I think doing value added, for example, paper pulp can be shipped, and if the demand in export markets is greater than the demand in domestic markets. If we're shipping 8 million tons of cardboard now for export, there's a demand in those export markets. I'm not sure I'd be willing or interested to say you can only use it in California. I'm not sure that's...
Not only, but it may be a preference or something like that. I mean, this has been discussed many times, and it's very... Because we have other environmental things to consider, like for paper, it's water. Do we have enough water, or is it better to ship it to Oregon that has more water?
Or use recycled water that is available. The difference between the two projects that we heard at the PIN Summit, the Utah mill is also a box board manufacturer, and so they're making boards to send to box manufacturers. For example, in the Central Valley, all the produce boxes, you could meet that demand, and all the Amazon boxes that are used. So there, it's not just pulping the paper, but turning the paper into a value-added box board. The Virginia project is located at a port, and that port location is essential to that project to give them the ability to export if the export market is a better opportunity than domestic markets. So I think there's no clear answer. The Utah project suggests that we can find opportunities around it, but I'm not sure how to state it here. Eric, you had your hand up.
I'm good.
Okay. We could, Kate, if you want to go up and look at the specific paper pulping one, we could talk about that. But, yeah.
Sorry, it's a little slow today for whatever reason, so apologies.
It does, the paper pulping one, that last sentence does talk about overcoming reliance on bale exports, but doesn't go any deeper than that. Clearly, if we are pulping here and there's demand for the pulp in domestic markets, you can ship it. You can ship the pulp more easily than bales, so the pulp could go to Oregon or Washington instead of going to China. So. Well, why don't we try to get through the rest of these recommendations? Manuel.
So as a more action-driven request here, per Chair Sanborn's suggestion, maybe we could request for additional consideration in the CAFTA program, where businesses get tax credits for manufacturing, recycling manufacturing equipment. So maybe there's something that could be added on there for material for those brokers that keep material here in the state. So, I mean, I don't know if we have time for that full recommendation by January, but maybe that's something that we mention, and then we could, request for more information and develop a more complete recommendation.
Yeah, we could make the distinction between the processing activity, even where pulp is a secondary processing activity, but not necessarily the end use. So the end use market would have a priority over secondary, or bring some focus to the end use markets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and captive being one. Okay, why don't you put a placeholder after that, the paper fiber one, just to expand on end use markets.
I would say expand on end use markets by offering tax incentives.
Okay. Let's try to get through. We're scheduled for a break in 5, so let's see how far we can get. We've got 2 more proposed recommendations after this. Yeah, so the communication, I think Sarah Toyota and I talked about this early on at one of our subcommittees. It kind of got incorporated in here to create this communication, share and track and share market information, so that we have a public source of information, not just pricing, but where material's going. Update that on a regular basis. Right now, we get an annual report from CoverCycle. What are the contamination limits? What are different markets looking for? Is it 3% contamination for export? Is it 5%? Is it 1%? What are we hearing? What are the market trends and opportunities? Where is material going and where might it go? What are those new businesses that are open up? We've seen the maps that show plastics and paper projects across the U.S. A lot of those are developed by the Northeast Recycling Coalition, and they have a really extensive program of sharing that information. So based on feedback from the commission, the 3rd paragraph down is to create this communication network, and we added college and universities in there. And again, calling out NERC as a model for the sort of information sharing. I look at the information that they provide fairly regularly, and we don't have anything like that. And
Just a quick question. Do any of these include reusables? Or is it pretty much just commodities?
this is commodity specific. I'm not sure. I've seen a couple of suggestions that there's some organizations focused on reuse. I'm not sure how this sort of information would apply.
Years ago, the reuse industry at the national level, I can't remember which reuse organization, tried to find out where there might be an abundance of, let's say, clothes here in California and it's needed in Michigan. It worked really well when you were Salvation Army that coordinated across national versus Goodwill, which tend to be standalone by county. It's a hard thing to push. It just keep in mind that maybe there's a way that we can make more reuse happen if we also monitored where reuse feedstocks have an overabundance and a need.
Yeah, there used to be Remax at one time at CoverCycle and Materials Exchange.
Oh yeah, way back then. Yeah. And in my deconstruction days, I fought for a lot of wood not to end up in Mexico because it was lead-based paint, but it still ended up down that way. So it's a really hard one to do because the commodity, it's just not as simple as baling something. That's it.
Okay, so this one's, again, to try to get communication. Sarah?
Yeah, I think it might be wise to also add some of what Commissioner Snyder had said earlier about the communication between CalRecycle and the different units. So instead of making it two-way communication, it just should be communication, and we could add that it needs to be within the CalRecycle departments as well. So maybe just adding not just communication between what's going on outside of CalRecycle, but within the departments as well. Two-way communication.
Take out two-way and.
Yeah, and just put communication, and then add and well, here's the other thing first, and we're explicitly saying in this CalRecycle, but in my mind, I feel like it should be that new department again, and for some reason that confuses me. So what do you think about taking out the CalRecycle should track and share to the new market section or unit should track and do these things, and then that unit in another paragraph should also communicate within the different departments and units within CalRecycle itself to bring in that information and to get the information that they've gathered back out into their own organization.
Yeah, so Kate, if you want to put unit after market development on that second line, and then I'll make that corresponding change throughout.
Right there. Sorry.
Yeah, or up above actually. But yeah, either place. But it says the paragraph above it says CalRecycle. The second line, yeah, there. Go to unit. Just put unit in there as well. Okay. And I think Sarah, your other comment probably fits on the third paragraph.
Yeah, that would be, yes.
Yeah.
So they could get that, and then the next line would be, and collect information from CalRecycle departments as well, and disseminate the information that they have to those departments.
Yeah. Okay. Once you roll down, Kate, we're a little late on taking a break, but it's up to us. It'd be nice to get funding. We talked about, if you recall, at our last meeting with Nick Lapis in a discussion. So there's no recommendation here. We know that the fund could be expanded. No money's been transferred in after 2005 and to the RMDZ or the RMDZ loan program. And then the GGRF money is up to the legislature every year. So you've got one static pool of money, and we talk about the RMDZ loan program on the next recommendations. But there's really no additional money because that GGRF money is dependent on the legislature. So all this does is to point out that the Integrated Waste Management Fund has not been increased for 25 years. CPI alone at that time has eroded 82.5% of the value. If it were brought up just to match the CPI, it would bring in an additional $47 million. So it's an observation. We're not recommending increasing that, although it should be, clearly. And then the next paragraph talks about the emission reduction potential. And potentially using the surcharge to help reduce the emissions. Again, it's, you know, it's an observation. It's not a recommendation. The 2/3 vote is the obstacle, and there was discussion of a generator surcharge. I didn't get into the details on that one because the details were always seemed to be lacking, at least in the public dialogue. But acknowledging that there was discussion of a generator surcharge. There's a paragraph here on EPR that Manuel and Heidi, I think, developed, and I dropped in. It just, again, it's an observation that EPR can help on this. It doesn't specifically mention EPR finance programs, and maybe it could, but I think it's, you know, that was the other thing that came out of the discussion around what could be done, and then the initiative that I think that we discussed and has a huge potential impact, particularly in the initiative language about supporting the expansion of the statewide infrastructure. So, you know, I know some people are thinking we just wait and let Eric's company prevail on the initiative.
Hey, it's more than just us.
I know. Right. Yeah. But the initiative is, you know, a potential great impact. I'm not sure I don't know what to do on that except to call out that we need funding if we're going to expand market development focus, and there's different ways to do it. None of which are easy or have succeeded. And I guess it's yours. Or Heidi, I'm sorry. Heidi, you had your hand up.
Thanks. I think if we're just going to do a laundry list of funding options, like acknowledge that we need funding for this work, although part of me still thinks there's plenty of support for the private sector to site facilities, and I personally think it should be them mostly. I mean, there are some that need to be government, but and we're getting the permitting and some of the barriers hopefully out of the way. But hopefully we don't need to have the government be trying to develop markets as much as with GoBiz and all the other things we've already got, that we really look at, it sounds like we're giving them a laundry list of options for funding. And if we're doing that, maybe we should just say that. We're making a statement that there's not enough money in market development right now for this program. We need more money. This is how much we think we need to be really useful and make this program work better. These are the different options for various funding sources, but we're not making a policy recommendation. And I guess to me, that's odd because we've been asked to give them policy recommendations. And the key to all of this, as we all know, is the hardest part, which is who's going to pay. So I guess I'm again just trying to think, if I'm a legislator or I'm Cal EPA getting this report, they're pretty much already aware of the funding problems. They may not be as aware that the fund is that short, but if we're not making a recommendation, I just don't know how helpful that's going to be to them. I'm open to discussion.
Again, yeah, no, I'm fine making the recommendation. I'm kind of going off of our last discussion at the last committee meeting, where, you know, we had a pretty focused, brief discussion around this, but nothing explicit came out of it. Yeah, I mean, maybe what we're saying is here's some options. They're familiar with these options: generator, landfill, EPR, right? You know, I think it's a combination. I don't think there's a silver bullet. You know, no one ring that conquers all.
I think that's the recommendation. Maybe we say for certain materials, we think that EPR might be the right approach. For other materials that we might need, you know, government to step in, like we're in composting, to get more help to put up these facilities. And maybe that's part of the recommendation, is we say, these are various options and we think you're going to need all these tools in the toolbox, and it depends, and maybe give them some parameters on when they might use one or the other. Like, for example, on EPR, I mean, CalRecycle has said for years that the ones that have no market, the products that have no market, are really the ones that are at the top tier, like HHW, for an EPR approach, because there's really nothing to do with them right now, and they need a lot of funding. Whereas other things, there's a market or a partial market, and that may not be as clear. But I'd love to hear from the rest of the committee on this, because again, I just want to make sure these are as useful as possible to the people who are going to be on the receiving end of these policy recommendations.
Okay, why don't you go up to the top, and Sarah, you get your hand up. Go up to the top of this section so that we can start to put some language in.
It's a little delayed, though it's on its way.
There.
Yeah.
Probably after the first paragraph. Okay. Sarah, did you want to speak?
Sure, I can. One of the things that I think this section needs to do is understand exactly what Commissioner Sanborn was saying. They're going to need to know what exactly there are markets for and what aren't. And there's going to be a lot of change in that, you know, throughout time and everything else. They need to be on top of that. That's part of what they're going to need, I guess, in that framework. And that's the information that's going to tie into how you're going to fund it. So I honestly think that my recommendation at this point would be to kind of pull this and reorganize it so that the things that we tell this section to do follows through to the rest of it in funding and everything else, so that they know they have to have this framework. We want them to have this framework. They need to know what the markets are. They need to get that information out. And then if they're going to decide on funding, if there's going to be these tools of funding, then that's what's going to help them decide which tool is best for what they're doing. And I'm just not following it through, the connections to all of it back to this section. I'm just having trouble following it. And I feel like we'll be able to get a better, more specific recommendations if we kind of move this around a little bit. And I'd like to take the time to do that. And I'm happy to work on it. So all that isn't really going to get written down right now, Kate.
Well, I think, yeah, so I think Heidi had some language around EPR programs. I mean, to me, EPR always works best on hard to handle toxic materials for which there is no clear market. Right.
And so that can be part of what we're gonna add. For the more difficult things like that, you're probably gonna wanna do an EPR program. But I feel like this isn't written to connect back to that section that's going to know what's going on in the markets, what there isn't a market for, so that they can make good decisions.
Yeah, I've always viewed, public financing as a kind of a fiscal strategy. Governments use finance and tax as ways to direct resources. You can deduct a single family mortgage, for example, but you can't deduct credit card interest, individual credit card interest. But you can deduct business expenses like credit card interest. So, there's those decisions get made over time, but it's that fiscal policy that drives investment. So, market development investments need to track priorities. When CalRecycle gets GGRF money, they decide that a significant portion of it goes to organics facilities. They decide that some of it goes to food recovery and some go to paper and or fiber and plastic and glass projects. But it's that mix, what's the mix? I mean, they're making that determination.
Right.
And so
from that mix, or from what that picture is of the mix at that time, they make decisions on the funding, legislation, things like that, right?
Yeah, they're determining these are priorities. So the priority for a while has been organics projects.
Exactly. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's been organic projects while we're exporting a lot of material that could be beneficially used in California. Maybe the difference is we're exporting it, but it's still, at least most of it's getting recycled, where we're not going to export post-consumer food and landscape material for composting. So, I'm trying to think through how we approach it.
I think it's going to need a little bit more reorganizing, in my mind. I'd like to propose doing that because I think it doesn't flow well enough to connect back to prioritize this. That the funding section just seems really separate, but it's not. It's dependent on what this section understands and knows once they build it, and I think that it can be a little clearer.
So do we want to pull the whole funding section out and then work on a recommendation
not
around
necessarily
funding?
Just I'd like to what is this, the create the market? I'd almost want to take this whole thing out and just reorganize it a little bit. That's just my thought. If everybody else wants to send it, that's totally fine with me. I feel like
Anne and Heidi.
I just wanted to go quickly back to where Chair Sanborn said that most of the legislators will know this. My area is, we've just elected a new senator. He actually is going to be super for climate change. He had a meeting on Saturday to thank all of us who were his supporters. And I've talked to him about this, but there'll be new legislators coming in all the time that won't know this. So there is still that value of them. And if they bring regional staff up to Sacramento versus hiring staff who have, like Jerry Hill's old staff in Sacramento, will they become as new? So there's always a value, Chair Sanborn. I'm looking, to me, John, an easy recommendation is updating the Integrated Waste Management Fund from the landfills. It's been that long. I'm liking it to right now. We are stuck with a 20-year-old storm drain tax that goes on at the county level, and it clearly cannot cover the cost of replacing storm drains, period. So, that is a logical first step for me. In terms of Commissioner Toyota's recommendations, maybe it would help us if you said our first priority would be this, that, and the other, and just say 1, 2, 3, 4. But I think what you've got here is good. My only concern might be, and I'm trying to run through my head, back when I was an RT member, reuse businesses compared to recycling businesses. It is more difficult to track the materials. It's more difficult to fund them. You might want to put a placeholder to saying, what are we doing for our reuse businesses? I think they're also more regional as opposed to statewide, which makes it more difficult. And yet they are going out of business. Maybe because they're retail, often, the lifespan of a retail business is much shorter anyway. It might just be normal business cycles, but it weakens the reuse infrastructure every time we lose them. And that stuff is going to end up in garbage.
I'm wondering if, to address Commissioner Toyota's thoughts, is because I agree, this needs to be, to me, really clear and really impactful, but maybe we do an introduction to the funding section that says, something to the effect of there are some products or materials that have no market, that are very obviously have no market. Things that are hazardous and toxic go right to the top, which is why our organization recommended we look at HHW EPR framework for all HHW and slotting them, having CalRecycle slot them over time. But that there's other things that are not so clear, and that these are various tools in the toolbox. And while it might be clear to us right now that we could recommend HHW be put under an EPR framework and delegated to CalRecycle, it could be that other things are not that clear, and we're leaving it to the legislature to decide what is politically possible and what is, their priority. We're not legislators, and we weren't elected. We're just giving advice. And I think maybe if we frame it that way, we could do it fairly quickly. And I'd be happy to work with Commissioner Toyota on reframing this part, or if somebody else wants to, that's fine too. I just want to but we are kind of getting down to the wire on time, but I don't think it needs a huge amount of it just needs some better framing maybe and clarity on the market's connection to the funding.
I'm up for that.
And I'd like to remind everybody, please don't use the chat for conversation. We're not supposed to be doing that for Bagley County.
I was thinking, Heidi, as you were talking, that once we see the recycling committee recommendations on what quote recyclable in California, there's going to be a number of products that fall off that list, and maybe that's a priority for EPR because we're determined there aren't adequate markets for them. So maybe products that don't have adequate markets, as opposed to products that have markets, but where we need to expand the infrastructure to access those markets. Maybe that's a dividing line between EPR and non-EPR. The issue about generator or landfill charge, to me, it's silly to not index a landfill surcharge like that and have it eroding in value. But as Nick said, he's tried since at least 2014 to move that forward. But yet our role is to make recommendations, and so I'm not averse to making that recommendation. It may meet the same fate as it has before, along with other things that are valuable like right to repair. But we still need to be in a position to make that recommendation, and I'm good with it. The generator part of it, I've always had a problem with. Mr. Potashner had to leave the meeting, but I think I heard him say that he had issues with it. It's an implementation issue. I think that there may be a role for it, but I don't have any problem making that recommendation. And maybe it's the difference between products that have markets and products that claim to be recyclable but don't have markets, or that are sold in California with no end-use markets for recyclability. But I kind of agree with what you said, Heidi. I don't think we're that far away from crafting something. And Manuel, you wanted to...
Because time is of the essence, could we come up with that language like now, and then so we could vote on all three proposals before the end of this meeting? Because like Commissioner Toyota said, most of the language is here. Perhaps it's just adding additional language to the word funding there, and then the next paragraph down is a beginning statement, and then at the very end of each of these paragraphs, we could just add a quick sentence where we propose the following, or we propose that this is reviewed for additional resources. Something really quick and general like that, so they know what. So legislators and staff know what we're really addressing here. So I would suggest that we add that first sentence, that CalRecycle needs a sustainable funding source. That could be right below funding. Is that everybody okay with that? See some head nods. And then then we need to come out with a quick recommendation here, and I get my recommendation will be to add for Cal Recycle to review. And I'd like to give opportunity to the rest of the commissioners. What else would you recommend we add here?
I think this would be where I would connect it back to this section that we have that we're asking them to create. So it would be that the marketing development unit would review various markets, basically what has markets, what doesn't have markets, needs to review various markets and identify what needs, I don't want to say new markets, but some kind of market support. And depending on what that is, these are the funding options. But this unit is going to have to, and then stop there. And then, because this unit is the one that's going to have to kind of frame the issues and know what they are in the markets. And from that information, decide whether it's an EPR, whether it's just increasing the fee.
I see that we might be getting ahead of ourselves because this unit's not developed yet. This is one of the recommendations, and now we're talking about funding.
Yeah, you know what? I see your point. So if they don't do that, but they still have to find a way to fund it, you're right. We could just leave it as Cal Recycle.
Do we want to suggest that the legislature needs to increase that landfill surcharge?
That's a recommendation.
Yeah, it doesn't apply just to market development, but it applies to Cal Recycle. The first sentence that Manuel suggested is a Cal Recycle focus, not a market development focus. And that, when you've eroded the value of the money by 82.5%, that seems to be an issue.
Hey, John, you have Heidi.
Or do we want to focus just on market development? Go ahead, Manuel.
Oh, you have Heidi ready to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed Heidi.
All right. I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is, the thing I like about EPR approaches is they're self-funded. They pay for Cal Recycle's oversight. They pay for the whole system to work. There are some policies out there, like the bottle bill, the way it was set up, that's not really EPR, but it does have funding. It's got a funding mechanism. And I guess maybe, we're the Market Development Committee, and we're trying to develop markets, and we're discussing funding. If we're talking about funding specifically for developing markets for Cal Recycle, there's two ways that can happen, really. It's producers do it through an EPR system, or there's these other tools in the toolbox. But all of them, as you said, John, are very politically challenging. For one, in a COVID pandemic with economic crisis right now, I would not be comfortable recommending an increase in that fee. And I think it's going to be a huge fight again. And I'm not sure that's the good. And the reason I wouldn't want to do that is because I don't want to distract the legislature from all these other things that are low-hanging fruit that I think that they could do that would be doable. And one of them is, for the things that don't have a market, that are toxic and dangerous, delegate that authority to Cal Recycle to put them under an EPR system, which would be self-funded. It wouldn't burden the whole bottom line of Cal Recycle anymore. And the more we put under EPR that doesn't have markets, the faster that fund is more able to support the rest of the work they have to do, like market development. So I don't know. I just think I don't know if we can craft this together on the fly right now, that maybe put in some placeholders of things we want to see written in, and then let two of two of you or us, or, you know, do language changes and bring it back. And we just authorize those two people to do that with the intent of what our outline is, and then bring it to the Wednesday commission meeting, which is, by the way, going to be very, very full of lots of recommendations. And I have no idea how we're going to get through them all as it is. So we might want to just kind of give this that kind of a punt and let them have at it, and then see how far we get on Wednesday.
Okay, well, yeah. So what I'm hearing is we want to work on this, but and I think recognizing, you know, here are the options. We could go into more detail, but I'm not hearing that we want to. I think the EPR detail is there, and certainly with Heidi's input, you know, that is there. Yeah, you know, the political call about recommending an increase on the landfill surcharge, you know, that's you know, I'm comfortable with it, but if we're not all comfortable with it, we don't need to take that. But I absolutely agree, this is not a time to be doing rate increases. But, so I'm torn. And
I think it depends on the purpose. Right now, I would imagine most counties are trying to feed the people who are food insecure, get technology to people who don't have technology so that they can work and go to school from home. And then the third thing is about retraining everybody who have lost their jobs. If a third or more of restaurants fail and don't reopen, there's a large number of restaurant workers that will need to be retrained in the field. So I think that there's going to be money for job training programs and how to get people into jobs that are less disaster sensitive on that. And if recycling, market development can ride that same job wave, then finding funding that is also getting these people back to work, which fits in really nicely with AB 2020 redemption centers. There's a good fit there. There's a good argument in front of elected officials, because we can't do it much at the local government level, but at the county level, our county is taking care funds for job retraining, for trying to keep those businesses open that can survive a pandemic. So I hear what you're saying, Chair Sanborn, and I agree with you. At the same time, we haven't really also talked about how much recycling means jobs. And maybe we need to also look at a funding structure for that, to bring that message back like we do every time there's a recession.
okay, I'm going to suggest that we pull the funding section out of the recommendations and take the rest, and be able to take the rest of it forward on Wednesday. And then let's revisit it. We have another meeting scheduled. We can look at it then. If Heidi, if you and Sarah want to take a crack at some language, you know, I'm for that if you've got the time to do that. But let's pull that, and we'll pull the funding section for now. And then if we take funding forward, it can be a separate power cycle funding recommendation. Okay with that? Okay.
Sure.
Do we need a break, or do we want to try to finish?
While you decide that, John, can I, Chair Davis, that we have one public comment I want to you. That's okay. Okay, this was from Gail Bryce, was submitted about 10:30. It will be very difficult to recruit investments for recycling facilities into California due to the high cost of operating processing facilities here, including the price of energy. This can be solved by implementing programs like carpet recycling, which pays subsidies for processing California material. For example, Amazon should pay an assessment on boxes shipped in California and a subsidy paid to processors. That's it, and published.
Okay. Let's look at the RMDZ loan recommendation that Manuel and I presented to the Zone Works. So speaking of funding, so this is RMDD specific as opposed to the broader issues. There is a $2 million cap now, and that is fixed in statute. The loan RMDD program cannot exceed $2 million, although borrowers can have multiple loans. I think what I've kind of heard in comments over time, RMDD is very focused. It basically becomes an equipment loan program with a 4% fixed interest rate, even though the statute doesn't set that. In fact, the statute says borrowers should repay principal plus interest on the basis of the rate of return for money in the surplus money investment fund. And that's the investment fund that the state uses for its surplus money. That interest rate is 0.698% now, down from 1.25% 3 months ago. And so the questions that we've heard over time, particularly from ZAs, is why have 4%, and is $2 million enough? They've kind of worked around the $2 million issue, but there's some other issues around the statutory requirement. So, Kate, why don't you scroll down here? So we talked about, what we're focused on here. The first 13 years of the program, there were 71% of the loans outstanding issued through the program were issued in the first 13 years. The values increased since then, 43% of the value in the last 15 years, but only 29% of the loans. So there's less loan activity, and the loans that are going out have a higher value. So what we're recommending is to work with the ZAs and CalRecycle, as well as previous borrowers and applicants who are people who've entered the process but turned away. And it probably should say potential applicants, because a lot of people get turned away as soon as they learn that it's 4%, which, like I said, is really focused on equipment. It doesn't address operating capital. So if you're a reuse business and you wanted to borrow money, you're probably more interested in operating capital than equipment or real estate. And the 4% really doesn't work for either of those. So would you scroll down? Keep going. So yeah, the $2 million max loan amount is capped by legislation. As I said, the workaround has been to allow multiple loans to applicants, but it's still $2 million on a single loan. And program administration is funded largely through the interest rate repayments, setting up a revolving fund. So reducing the interest rate would affect the amount of money that's available for program administration. And that's important, clearly, when there's no additional money coming in from the Integrated Waste Management Fund into the program. So without that infusion, it's really a revolving loan that needs to be self-sustaining. So the recommendations that have come forward, some of these have been talked about repeatedly by ZAs over time, people who try to work this through CalRecycle. One is to accelerate the loan approval process to within 90 days of CalRecycle receiving a complete loan application. I'm not sure, talking to loan staff, if that's really a big issue. There may be some times when 30 days becomes an obstacle, but I think having that assurance, being able to tell the loan applicants that this is the policy would be very helpful. The B, referring potential projects immediately to CalRecycle loan staff for eligibility determination and initial intake, is an important recommendation. Right now, loan applicants are referred to that group of local assistance people, and they have to go through an eligibility determination at the local assistance level rather than the loan officers. And so we think that putting these potential applicants in direct contact with the loan staff makes a lot of sense, takes a bottleneck out of the process. We've been told, Manuel, think that there could be 3 additional steps before someone gets to a loan officer. And so the people who ultimately are making the loans are probably most familiar with loan eligibility, but they're bottlenecked out of the process. An online loan application form would make things much more expeditious rather than the written forms that have to move forward now. And those could be directed to loan staff and the local assistants or other people involved in the process, including VAs. I know of at least 2 instances where loans were ready to be approved with the zone administrators not being aware of it, and where there were problems with the loans. There were problems with the applicants, there were problems with project eligibility, and yet the VAs didn't find out about it until all the work had been done to approve the loan. Reducing the loan interest rate, that statutory language about SMIF, I guess the workaround is that it's SMIF plus whatever the percentage that draws it up to 4%. But, when the loan interest rate was tied to the state municipal investment fund, that was in the early years. That's when you saw 71% of the loans being made. There should be a comprehensive review to secure perpetuity. It's kind of complicated now with no infusion of money. The only way to keep the program rolling is by loan repayments, and so it's a disincentive to lower the interest rate and create demand. The iBank loan, I think, we heard that it could yield anywhere from an additional $20 to $25 million. It's basically taking the loan portfolio, issuing bonds to the state investment banks secured by the loan portfolio repayments. So rather than a revolving loan fund, you're generating a larger immediate infusion of money through the sale of bonds that's secured by the same repayment process as the revolving loan fund. So it's a way to potentially put more money out there for immediate loan. And that would allow the next bullet to increase the overall loan amount by focusing on higher priority materials. So the $2 million becomes its own cap, and having additional money would allow more loans to be made. So, but it's hard to do that when I think right now there's about $6.5 million in the fund. That seems to be about the annual reoccurring amount through loan repayments. So it's hard to say increase the existing loan cap when the amount of the principal amount in the loan fund is pretty fixed. Offering a microloan program would make it more attractive to reuse businesses. The issues with there's no reason that loans below loans are made below $2 million. There's no minimum amount of loan, but the points and fees that accrue on the upside become more burdensome on smaller loans. So a microloan program that was maybe easier to access or had a different focus, for example, for the microloan for reuse businesses focused on their operating requirements would be an approach. But right now, the microloan, the smaller loans don't seem to get made, probably largely because of the reuse and fees, and also because they really don't fit in the equipment lending 4% range that the program now refers to. So, this is a pretty focused set of recommendations. It's been aired out over time between the zone administrators and CalRecycle staff. You know, I think there's good reason to support this, Manuel. I don't know if you want to comment on this. You've had a lot of discussion through your role.
Yeah, thank you. These are pretty action driven, and like John said, we elicited we requested for feedback from several groups, including the folks that are on the street, creating these loans, working with applicants at the local level, and also with CalRecycle. So I think I believe it's ready to move forward, but leave it up to the rest of the committee to give us their feedback.
Okay. I'm hearing consensus. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good, solid set of recommendations. You know, we'll see where it goes, but I think it's a good way to, bring the program around by focusing on this. All right, Kate, you want to bring up the last one? And carpet. So moving off of demand side recommendations to recycled content recommendations. Trading
Chair
demand
Davis.
Yes.
Just a reminder, we have 2 public comments regarding carpet. At what time you'd like to hear them, just let me know.
Yeah, let's hear them now. And then,
Okay. We had 2 comments about the carpet from Gail Bryce at XT Green. Her first one was comments are as a representative of XT Green. CARE's administration of the California Carpet Stewardship Program with CalRecycle oversight has resulted in a major expansion of the carpet recycling infrastructure in California, which now processes all fiber types and generates significantly increased recycled output yields. XT Green appreciates the committee's progress made from its carpet preliminary draft recommendations to its November 27th final proposal. We especially appreciate the focus on collections, which currently is the limiting factor in expanding California processing at existing facilities, and the planned construction of XT Green's patented facility in Rancho Cucamonga to recover resources from carpet. We also support the need to consider the potential impact of PFAS in carpet recycling. However, as the final proposal could have a major impact on the future of carpet recycling, it should be distributed to the advisory committee for review as individuals. Thank you for your consideration. Gail's second comment is expanding on my request that this draft final recommendation be shared with the individuals of the California Carpet Stewardship Advisory Committee. It was difficult to comment on the preliminary draft recommendations due to the general nature of the recommendations and general agreement with CARE's response to these comments. The draft final is much more specific, and CARE's response would again be of interest. Therefore, I again offer to send these draft final recommendations to the advisory committee to comment back as individuals. Again, thank you. And that's it.
looks like Heidi, you've got.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that the commission is making everything very public on the Google Docs, and these recommendations are all posted there. So there's no secret, and certainly anybody from the advisory committee, I mean, John, we could go ahead and just email them again. I think we did it last time, and we could certainly do it again and email CARE. And I think, you know, hopefully we do want everybody's input as we start to refine these down. But it's also just as much, I mean, we're doing our best as a volunteer group to get the word out, but it's also everybody's job on the stakeholder side to help follow and give us input as soon as they can. So we do appreciate what anybody can do to help us get the word out if you have connections with anyone you think who should be commenting. I know I called somebody this morning to make sure that they were watching today and knew that we had this up, because I think all of us have different connections, and that's part of the reason we're on the commission, trying to make sure we get the word out. Is there something more you think we could do, Chair, to get the word out to everybody?
Well, yeah, I mean, we did send the preliminaries to both CARE and the committee. So I think they're both aware that we're working on recommendations. We could send this, we could send it after it goes to the commission, you know, however, you know, but I'd be surprised if they're not aware of what we're working on. And yeah, let's look through this. Heidi and I spent time writing this up and refining it. And so once you scroll down through, as you know, there is this statewide carpet recycling program designed and implemented by the manufacturers. So it's the CARE is the Carpet America Recovery Effort, the stewardship organization. They design and implement their own program funded with a visible fee assessed at the point of sale. They prepare a plan to reach program goals, and finances distributes the money, reports to Cal Recycle on their progress. There is this advisory committee that's not mentioned here, but as you've heard, we've reached out to them. Cal Recycle's role is review and improve plans, check progress, and support industry by providing oversight and enforcement. Carpet stewardship law states the amount of the assessment should be sufficient to meet but not exceed the anticipated cost of carrying out the plan. To me, that's always been a key part of the language. Okay. Right now, that assessment is 35 cents. So there's a nexus, a clear nexus in the statute between the amount of the assessment to carry out and the cost of carrying out the program. So the 35 cents a square yard is on carpet sold in California. You kind of got this issue where that money is funding the recycling of largely legacy material. Some of that 35% of a square yard is cut-offs from installation that comes back immediately, but a lot of it is the tear-outs of old carpet, not just by carpet installers, but by flooring installers generally. So there's this balance between the assessment on new carpet and the cost of handling the discards. The subsidies amount to, or I'm sorry, the assessment amounted in 2019 to over $28 million. Most of that goes to collectors, sorters, processors, and manufacturers in the way of subsidies, varying levels of subsidies. Over half of it, 14.56 million in 2019. There are direct program costs that include collection costs. We've heard a lot about collection. So CARE's current collection programs are direct program costs, not subsidies. And then there's CARE administration, $2 million. So the total in 2019, 24 million out of 28 million that was collected. The statute set a 24% recycling rate by January 1, 2020. The program reached 22.5% in the fourth quarter. There's some language in CARE's annual report that suggests, hitting 24% could mean a quarter. It could mean hitting that, and not necessarily on an annual basis, but I don't think we need to get into that little issue right now. See how that plays out if they hit their 24% by the end of this the coming month. There were 73 million tons collected, with 58 million tons of yield, the output, which was primarily PET. So one of the interesting things in my mind has always been to track the fibers. I'm told that PET and nylon 6 are about the same percentage of carpet sold, and yet the PET recovery is more than double the nylon 6 recovery. The comments we've heard about collection have come, I think, largely from the nylon 6 side. Those are the companies that are operating, trying to capture more materials. So, but the yield, at least now we know what the yield was. Calcium carbonate is a material that's kind of part of the binder of the carpet. It's a very low value material. It costs about a penny a pound for virgin material, and CARE has to subsidize it really heavily to get that level of to handle that level of recycling output. The subsidy is somewhere around 17 cents a pound, so it's 1,700 times the price of virgin material to get people to use calcium carbonate. You heard PFAS mentioned. DTFC issued a profile for carpets. It's our second level, just short of regulatory level, and found that there are issues with carpet generally, and from a toxic standpoint, particularly the PFAS, and specifically on carpet recycling. And I need to say, there are issues whatever happens to carpet, whether it's incinerated, landfilled, or disposed at end of life, or recycled. There are issues. Okay, so there's no clear, shining option for handling carpet at the end of life. The material was used mainly as a stain, anti-stain treatment, and with these fluorinated polymers, but they can't be removed during recycling. So as carpet is recycled, the PFAS material continues in the process, and wherever that material goes, then the PFAS are still there and bound up in the fibers. Why don't you scroll down? As I said, there's no clear preferential treatment. Landfill can leach the PFAS into water. The wastewater treatment plants end up with that material. So what we're tasked with is trying to increase the demand for recycled content products, especially high quality value added products. So, and as I said, we had comments both on collection and toxicity. So, okay, yeah, that we need to take that. Heidi, I think this was your comment that's added and highlighted, and I guess I wanted to clarify. Is there potential legislation, or are we suggesting there should be?
I just haven't had time to do the research. I think it's been discussed. So I guess I just highlighted it because I think if we want to make a recommendation that there be some sort of ban on the sale of carpet with PFAS, just like we did with the precautionary principle on the food composting, food packaging, we should say that.
Okay. Okay. But you believe there is some potential legislation being discussed? So we can unhighlight the.
Yeah, we can unhighlight.
Okay. Okay.
And just say, well, actually, I think what we should say is that there could be, or we could just agree to discuss this right now as far as do we want to recommend that there be an ultimate ban on the sale of carpet or any flooring with PFAS? And that's a whole nother discussion is, why are we just focused on carpet? We don't even address pad. Pad can have the most PFAS from what I understand and should be getting tested from DGS and isn't required right now to be tested by DGS like carpet. And I'd like to add that, I think that's in our recommendation. But then the whole flooring issue that we've had several people bring up, why not all their flooring types like the vinyl floorings?
So let's look down at the recommendations with that in mind. You want to scroll down? Yeah, there we go. Is there a legislative priority? Yes. Consider PFAS treated carpet and pad sales banned. So it's there. And so this is in the format anyway. Does this proposal require additional funding or changes to resource allocation? Collection costs would increase to provide hard-to-handle reimbursement, and collection costs may increase for installers' network expansion. So these are summaries or addressing issues that come from the proposal down below. So why don't you go ahead, Kate? Yeah, and CARE is preparing recommendations now around highest recyclability and differential assessments that were originally expected in October. but have been delayed now to the end. So we don't know what those are, and so we're working in a little bit of void and trying to ignore some of those issues, but also anticipate them. So the first two issues are really about reporting and planning detail around resin types. I think CARE's response was, they're okay with the first one and they're trying to collect data on the second one. So it's really getting information around resin type. How much is it costing to recycle PET as opposed to nylon 6 on the second one on a financial plan. The implementation plan, again, the same sort of thing. So not having recyclability information, we still need that resin type profile. So those are really kind of reporting issues. The next one have to do with the toxicity issues on DTSC's profile. So this is the first one is a recommendation to provide public written pre-approval for any studies to be conducted with fee money and ensure that those studies remain public and transparent to CalRecycle and the public with results provided in a timely fashion. So there are studies, and one study particularly that identified PFAS being used. I think the recommendation here is to get the written pre-approval in a way that people are aware before the studies are undertaken, so people have concern about the focus or potential focus of a study, that they have the opportunity to respond to it in advance and not after the fact. So that this was a comment that was generated from, or a recommendation that was generated from a comment that we specifically received about a particular study and result. But the next one is a broader one, that CARE needs to address concerns raised by DTSC's profile, identifying protocols to reduce worker and continued public exposure impacts from carpet recycling. Exposures include continued circulation of PFAS through fiber and calcium carbonate recycling. So the worker safety, to me, is critical. The people who are handling the carpet, the people who are processing the carpet now, that's, I think, just an essential thing that needs to be addressed. When I was on the carpet committee, the DTSC's preliminary work was brought forward. It's not even acknowledged in CARE's annual reports. It was not acknowledged in the 5-year plan. I thought that was a huge oversight. So we do want to let CARE figure out a way to address this. What are they going to do? And ignoring it doesn't seem to be a good idea. There are, we believe, carpet member organizations who have stopped using those materials, the PFAS precursors in their products. So let them be identified and let us know who they are. If there are manufacturers who continue to sell carpet in California traded with PFAS, the legislature and governor should ban its sale in the state. Okay, so we've heard that some have stopped using it. That's great, but what about the rest? We want to continue to allow it to be sold. And it's not just carpet, as Heidi said. And carpet padding is not a part of CARE's program, but it's collected in the program and manufactured using recycled carpet. So Department of General Services at least should be authorized to assess PFAS content in carpet padding. I think Heidi had brought this specific recommendation forward. So we don't have the other flooring on here. We had that as a separate item, so I think it's still on our bullet list, but rather than focus outside the carpet recommendation here, except for padding. And padding is collected in CARE's program, so it's appropriate. You want to go down, okay, finish the recommendations as we're running short on time. CARE needs to set and meet collection goals for material and volume to serve in-state recycling manufacturers. A lot of the carpet that's recovered, a lot of the processed fiber gets shipped. We have in-state manufacturers who are opening. We need to support them and at least get the material to those people and not have them fail because they can't collect material. And those goals should be resident specific. Instead of there seems to be a lot more PET flowing through the system than nylon 6. And yet we have nylon 6 processors wanting material. So we should be able to address that on a material specific basis. The last one I think is an important one to understand that it's the installers who are handling carpet. Up to 90%, 80 or 90% of carpet discounts are handled by installers. It's not the do-it-yourself people. So CARE is working to increase carpet deliveries from those people. There are issues, but clearly that is the focus. It's already there. It's at retailers, wholesalers, regional distribution facilities. Stay on that page. We've added language here that if CARE can't assure delivery of good value carpet, they can't meet their goals. They cannot meet the goals due to lack of collection. They can't claim the lack of collection prevented them from meeting the goals. There's a link between collection yield and recycled output, and it's very clear. So, they should collect carpet at no cost from installers network in order to avoid conflicts with local hauling arrangements. We've heard that's an issue. You know, it's the same thing that you hear with a lot of C&D issues where, you know, CARE going in and charging is one thing. Charging to haul it off may be cheaper than the franchise, but it violates the franchise. But collecting it at no cost, anyone is free to donate their material. So they should collect it at no cost or make arrangements with the haulers to deliver to a processor or a collector sorter. And then CARE should collect carpet at no cost from MRFs, landfills, and transfer stations, including a hard-to-handle reimbursement. You know, again, 90%, 80, 90% is at the installers. That's where they need to make it work. The installers are doing something with it now. It just needs to get to CARE, and how they get it should be there in their business. So, Heidi, did you have some comments?
I did, actually. Now that I'm looking at this again, I think we should change the subject title. It says Cal Recycle Market Development Focus, but that's very, very general. And really what this is a carpet program. They're carpet program recommendations. And so maybe we should just say that they're carpet program recommendations in the title, in the subject.
So, yeah, let me look at that. That's an oversight. That's my fault.
Yeah, I figured. And then the other thing is, as we were reading this out loud, it just, some of these are legislative proposals. Some of these are things Cal Recycle can deal with. And I'm wondering if we should reorganize them to break them out by legislative proposals and then things that Cal Recycle can do. Because, for example, when we, under possible legislative priority, well, we have many, many recommendations here. We're only talking about the PFAS being treated products being banned. But there's other recommendations like DGS should be given authority, which has to be, I believe, in law, to test the pads as well for the PFAS. And so therefore that would be kind of incomplete to somebody, I think, that we didn't list all the legislative priorities.
Okay.
I just thought maybe it would be clearer if we organized them that way, but I'm open to ideas.
Yeah, we could emphasize it. And it really, until you said that, it wasn't clear to me that it was a legislative limitation on DGS. So, yeah, we definitely should call that out. And I think, I mean, for number 6, for example, it's pretty explicit about banning banning the sale of FIFA carpet with FIFA. And I hadn't thought about, pulling the format says, is there legislation? We said yes, and then we list what it is. So
Yeah, maybe the ones that are legislative, we just list them or put numbers or something next to them.
okay, so we need to add legislation on the DGS. Okay, could you go up to the top and see? The heading's wrong. I'm guessing it's carpet.
Oh, sorry, it's frozen currently. It should be moving.
Okay. Yeah, I'll catch it. We have a public comment.
We do. And actually, we have 2 public comments, but one I missed was for the Cal Recycle recommendation. So we can visit that at the end of this agenda item. But one from Gail Bryce about carpet is I disagree that everyone should have known that this final proposal was published. It was not listed on the agenda. I only found out this weekend when I double checked the Google Docs for this specific meeting yesterday. This final is dated on Friday of a holiday weekend. It is significantly different than the preliminary recommendation. It should not be forwarded to the commission until CARE, members of the advisory committee, and the public has had a chance to see this final draft.
And I didn't mean to suggest that everybody knew that it had been published, just that I believe the advisory committee and CARE are aware that we're working on the recommendation. And I'm looking at my copy of the carpet proposal. I need to change, the heading needs to change.
Through the chair.
Yeah.
Hand was up. Going back to Chair Sanborn's comment about dividing things into legislative action and then Cal Recycle's action, exactly where would we make recommendations that need to get down to the county or city level? I say that because for years we have had deconstruction ordinances. They're on local government's books, but they don't get followed at all. So, and with the amount of self-hauling and small businesses, even a number of businesses that work in remodeling that may not be fully recognized businesses, how do we get the word out to them of this law, the legislative changes or the Cal Recycle changes?
So Heidi, correct me, but our recommendations are to state, federal agency, and the legislature. The way to address, I think, what Ann's saying is that we would be recommending that Cal Recycle, for example, reach out and publicize the deconstruction ordinance, but I don't think we're empowered to make recommendations beyond that.
I understand. I think it's just a gap that's missing. So when it comes down to actual implementation, I'm not sure this isn't the right place to fix it, but we should keep that in mind. I just honestly, I've got 4 houses being remodeled around me and I've been watching them and not one is deconstructed, not one is separating for recycling. Carpet had been removed out of each one and all of them went into a 40-yarder with everything else. So, we have a good recycling coordinator, but it's simply not happening.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about C&D in an upcoming meeting, Heidi.
But carpet is a component of it. I don't know if we can give Cal Recycle additional directions on how to get the word out to local governments or to elected officials, because often staff does not let those of us at the elected level know what's going on, and yet we're the liaison to the public. So just keep that in mind.
Heidi.
So Cal Recycle years ago did a model ordinance for deconstruction and encouraged the counties to use them and the cities to use them. And they do in their annual reports, the local governments are supposed to be reporting on what they're doing. Now we had achieved the 50% or very close to it, the recycling rate, and now we're way below it. And I guess this raises a question in my mind, John, as to whether we say anything about this in the report, that there was a time when Cal Recycle was very active with local governments and following up with them on their annual reports, but we hit the 50% goal. We turned our attention to 75, but now we're way below. We're down to 37 and dropping. So I wonder, are they going to turn their attention back to the local governments to get back to the 50? Or what's happening there? And maybe that's a comment from this committee. We ask for an update on what they're doing to assist local governments and remind them about these model ordinances that they could implement that could be very helpful to achieving much higher recycling rates.
Yeah, and just, I mean, I think our focus is market development. We could probably get there, but I know from subcommittee discussion with Sarah Toyota and I that we're going to be talking about C&D. We're going to be talking about deconstruction, and when you look at the waste characterization, 2018 waste characterization, 30% of what's going in the landfills is construction material. So it's a huge segment. We're going to talk about from the market development perspective, but I think it's probably, you want to know why things are crashing. It relates to construction activity largely.
Through the chair,
And,
can I?
And we have just a reminder, we have 5 minutes left, so we need
Just, I very much appreciate what Chair Sanborn said. I agree. I would only add to it that annual, at the local level, annual reporting to the public. There is, in my community, no annual reporting to the public.
So,
which means coming through council meetings. So,
yeah, I really want to see if we're okay with the carpet recommendation before we get off track. So, with the changes that we discussed, and we changed the title. Let Heidi and I, I think we worked on it. I think we're real close on this, and let's bring this one forward. Okay.
I recommend we approve it, but I think we do need to do an immediate reach out to CARE, to the carpet people, and to the commissioners on the advisory committee to make sure they know that we're doing this and it's going Wednesday. But again, it's 2 bites at the apple. The commission can hear it Wednesday. They can hear it again on the 16th and again on the 18th before it's final. So.
Yeah, and then it's not final for another 6 months. It's, the legislative recommendation is the one that we're trying to reach for. So I'll make the few changes that we talked about, send it over to Heidi, and then ship it around as we did the earlier round. Okay. Okay, where are we? we had the response to the data request on the review grant.
Sure. And John, yes. So the next agenda items were response to previous public comments and data requests. Really briefly, so I don't miss it, I would like to read the public comment that was about the CalRecycle recommendations. It's from Steve Lautsey. It's more than 150 words. It's been published, so I'll just read the first 150 very quickly, and I can send the committee all these comments. So again, about the CalRecycle market development recommendations. As someone who led the California Association on RMDZs for 16 years, I strongly support the priority recommendation for CalRecycle to more clearly focus a core team of personnel on market development tools and strategy for California going forward. Mashing up materials management and local assistance functions of the agency has not worked, especially since the need for closing the loop has exceeded the need to divert materials from landfill. The performance numbers and the related recommendation about the RMDZ loan fund, yet to be taken up, clearly demonstrate how the program has received less resources and attention since 2007. Local assistance is primarily regulatory and focused on local government, while effective market development strategy encourages investment by private sector businesses. The mindset of encouraging business and facility development is markedly different than that of monitoring policy compliance, much like facilitating solar energy generating capacity is different than regulating fossil fuel emissions. And that goes on. That has been published. Again, I'll send those to all of you, and I'll go back to our agenda.
Yes. Our next meeting. So we are scheduled for December 7th. We scheduled that specifically to give us time around the commission schedule to get final comments. We did not schedule December 14th, and so I think what we can do is see what happens on Wednesday at the commission. It sounds like we want to come back, maybe focus on the funding issue. We could do that on the 7th. We could schedule one for the 14th because we need to do that now. If we're going
I'm already
to,
booked for the 14th.
Okay, that's why we scheduled the 7th. So, all right, so we are scheduled for December 7th. I think we know we want to address the funding issue. I don't know that we need to address the funding issue now, because if we're not coming back with work on the rest of the recommendations, we could abandon the December 7th meeting after the commission, or do we just want to plan on holding a meeting on the 7th and work on funding and whatever else comes back from commission comments?
I think we should meet on the 7th. If it's a short meeting, I guess it would be a short meeting, but just finalize it.
Okay. So we're going to take recommendations forward. We'll get comments. We may have more work to do on the 7th, and we want to address the funding issue, and Heidi and Sarah are going to find time in between to propose some language.
And Chair, the agenda for that meeting is already published.
Yes, and we had to publish that in advance, so it's pretty generic. It's like today's agenda. No presentations.
Just to confirm, how many items are coming to the commission Wednesday from this committee? It's source reduction, rate to repair, and carpet? No, and GoBiz? We've got a bunch of them.
Yeah, consolidated permitting, GoBiz, How Recycle, absent funding, RMDZ loan, and carpet. So there's 5 recommendations. I
think we're gonna have a hard time getting through all these on Wednesday. My suspicion is that we're gonna end up having one from each committee go through that way until and I don't think we're gonna have enough time to hit them all. So just FYI. You might want to put your...
Yeah, I don't know what the priorities are. If anybody has an idea, we've talked about the consolidated permitting a number of times and incorporated comments from the commission. But we've talked about it here too, and as you see, every time we look at it, there's more. So, anybody
Chair,
have
the meeting it's 12:01. So the meeting is over officially, unfortunately.
I'll ask during the commission. Bye.
Okay, I'll probably unfortunately have to do a notice of adjournment because we didn't get to meeting, but no worries, nothing on you guys. And we'll follow up about notes and I'll get you all those comments. So from today.
See you Wednesday.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Good luck Wednesday.
Bye-bye.